What's up, everybody? This is a huge build, and I'm going to break down the process so that you can be inspired to build something never before possible. I'm going to introduce the use of rotors to you and show you how to create moving objects and even combine those objects together to make larger, complex structures. While learning this process myself, I was sure that I could create something on a larger scale, and the end result was epic. Let me explain. While playing with the helicopter one day, I became curious as to what made the helicopter blades spin, and after further inspection, I ran across a game component called tail rotor spin. I began testing it immediately, and my trials, while humorous, didn't show signs of being useful until I applied the component onto a structure. From here, I ran more tests and experiments, and then it hit me. What if I can make a Ferris wheel? More tests proved to be unsuccessful until I thought of a design more plausible, like making blades on a windmill. In other videos, you may have seen me connect different game objects together, and that's what I'm doing here as well. So I began by creating a structure similar to the helicopter rotor. I started off with a single log, which when placed becomes a beam, and I intended it to be like a rotating shaft that blades would attach themselves to. Using Unity Explorer, which you can learn more about in a linked video on my channel, I pressed F7 to open the Object Explorer, and I searched for the log I just laid down, which will be the last beam on the list of active objects. By default, the bounding box appears on game objects you select in the Object Explorer, but you can disable those by pressing a delete key. If you're new to Unity Explorer, the inspector panel shows off all of the properties of your selected object. We can change the position and rotation of objects, deactivate and reactivate them, and we can view a list of children attached to this object, making it apparent if any children exist. And we can even inspect components like you've seen with the helicopter. To give this beam rotation, I began to type tail rotor spin into the object's component box and selected it from the list, hitting the Add Comp button to attach it to the beam. When I select the tail rotor spin component, it opens up next to its game object in a separate panel. I can see it has a property named spin amount, and each value for the X, Y, and Z axis are set to 0. To spin in a direction like the helicopter rotor, I will adjust the Z value to 100 and hit apply. I can also toggle this component on and off if I need it. As you can guess, I question if the beam object can it rotate other beams attached? So I place the log. At the bottom of the Object Explorer, I open my newly placed log, and like the first beam, it has its own set of properties. I re-enabled the rotation component on beam 1, but it had no effect on beam 2. So I decided to make the second beam a child object of beam 1. I did this by copying the first beam's name, beam 1, by pressing the Ctrl and C keys together, and I pasted that name into the parent box of the second beam with the Ctrl and V keys and pressing Enter to change the parent. This means that whatever happens to the first beam, like rotation changes for example, it would apply those changes to the children attached. Looking inside the children panel for the first beam, I can confirm that our second beam is attached to it, and I can see now that the beams are rotating together. I can also toggle the children and components if needed. I knew right away this was going to be a game changer. With this knowledge, it was time for me to take the build to the next level. As I mentioned before, I thought of a design for a long ramp which would act like a huge blade on a windmill. The construction process for this was quite easy, and I quickly jumped right into my build and I laid my foundation down. It spanned 14 logs long and 1 log wide, and I started to give it a low-rise slope upwards. I wanted a nice blade that I could relate to being like a slice of pie or a blade on a fan. I eventually settled on a ramp that was 6 floors high, and while this was satisfying, it was only the beginning. Now that I had the initial blade completed, I needed to link all of the beams and pillars together. If you remember from before, this process involved adding any objects to the rotating beam as a child object. The difference now is I had to do this over 100 times to other beams and pillars. As a quick refresher, I copied the name beam 1 from the object that rotates. I want this to be the parent controlling the rotation for every other game object. In the Object Explorer, I would open each game object and pass the beam 1 name into the parent box and select it off of it to apply it. I did this again and again until I began to create a system for passing this name over and over. I opened up several objects at once and began pasting and choosing the next object in a repeated sequence. As the objects became children, I could see them being removed from the Object Explorer as they were added to the Beam 1 object. Several times throughout this process, I would stop and deactivate the initial beam to show me how far along I was. Surprisingly, this process only took me a few minutes once I had my sequence down. I toggled off and on the final blade to confirm it was complete, and I was ready to see what I could make with this thing. With this blade standing tall, I finally had the means to make something epic. Since Beam 1 contained all of the objects that make up the blade, I knew I could make clones of it. In the inspector panel, there's a button to instantiate, or in this case duplicate the selected game object, and that's what I did. The new blade was created in the same exact place as the original, and a few rotations would move it to where I wanted to place it. I repeated this process a few times and started to see the wheel come to life. After a few attempts to align the blades, I had to take a different approach because it was hard to get the angles correctly just looking at them. This time I set the rotation angles based on 90 degrees and duplicated this process, giving me the wheel of my dreams. While this was very cool to see in action, I remembered way too late that one of the main attractions to a Ferris wheel are the lights, so I went back to a single blade. In my previous videos, you may have seen me changing light colors on light bulbs, and that's what I wanted to do here, but without the bulbs. This game currently has a console command called Create Light. In the console, I typed in Create Light and opened up the light from the bottom of the Object Explorer. In the components for the light, we can see one called Unity Engine Light. Selecting it opens up its properties in a new panel, and we can adjust the light color properly by adjusting its 4 values. Each value represents how much of each color you want to apply, from 0 to 1, and the 4 values represent red, green, blue, and the alpha channel. With this information, I began creating a light and setting its color and choosing a location for it. When I needed a new light, I would make a clone of the last one I positioned and moved it to the next location with its set of colors. This process was very exciting for me, and I only hope I made a decent blend of colors. Once I was happy where my lights were aligned, I needed to make them child objects of our first beam, Beam 1. One by one I began linking the lights, and in no time, this step was done. Now that I have this blade bedazzled, I went back with what worked for the first wheel. I began by cloning the blade and placing them in 90-degree rotations from each other. When I made the initial cross, I linked all the blades to Beam 1. From here, I made a clone of that fan and rotated it 45 degrees, showing 8 blades overall. I continued to repeat the process, linking any new blades to Beam 1. The final blade count was 24, and created the most amazing look, which I didn't even think was possible to begin with. I want to say overall this process took nearly an hour to accomplish altogether, and I plan to make so much more, as this was the first thing to come to mind. I look forward to seeing what you're able to come up with, so let me know in the comments or share your thoughts on my Discord. When everything was done, I enabled the tail rotor spin, and let's check this thing out.